Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Today, it's not going to be about chainsaws. So we're going to be talking about hobbies again. Why hobbies are good for you. So our main hobbies, like I say, are mostly collecting everything and anything with engines and motors in them or on them, and all the peripherals that go with them. So here's a good example. Model engines. So anyway, these are for entertainment. So there's two types of collecting we do. One's for working collections, like our chainsaws, vintage chainsaws, and tractors and other stuff. That you learn how to work on them, take care of stuff, and get your work done with them too. But this is just for leisure and fun. So anyway, I'm going to talk about these little model airplane motors here to begin with. These are made by a company. Hydroplane Tool and Hobby started making model airplane engines in 1938, and these are later engines. This is a style of engine they came out with in 1949. It's called an OK Cub, and this is a small one they made. It's a 0.024 cubic inch. It's a glow plug engine, and the cylinder head has a small piece of nichrome wire in it. And what you do is you hook up a ground and a hot lead to a battery. It's 1.5 volts, and it glows. And that, like a glow plug on a diesel engine, is basically what it does. And then once the engine is running, the heat of the combustion will keep that nichrome wire hot enough to keep it running. So this one's kind of an unusual one. It has dual ports on it for the exhaust. The intake is just a little tiny hole in the very back. It comes in, and the crank has a slot in it, what they would call a rotary valve. So when it opens, it draws a fuel air mixture in, and here's a little mixture needle here. And of course you have your drive shaft here. You'd have a propeller on it. But a cute little rascal. So this is the most common OK Cub engine. It's an 049. And this one's set up for model airplane use. You have your mixture needle screw right here. This is what they have, a venturi on the front where the air and the fuel comes in, and that's what they would call a rotary valve engine also. The crank has a cutout in it so that it draws in the mixture, and your fuel tank's back here. And you see the part missing on the top here. That's what's called a glow plug. The earlier one here, the whole cylinder head, is a glow plug. This one has a replaceable one. Like this, looks like a little miniature spark plug, but like I say, it has a nichrome wire inside to become the heating element to start it, and then the ignition keeps it hot, so it just threads in the top of the motor. This one is a 049 also, but you can see it's got a big brass flywheel, and it's got a place for a U-joint here, and this is for a boat application. So, the extra inertia of that heavy flywheel there, would take the place of a prop, because this has to fit down inside of a boat in a small area, and that's how they would keep them going there. And mixture screw, and these have ports down here on the bottom for the exhaust. So anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Well, the next brand of motor is a K&B. Started in 1946, and they're still in business today. They're actually the largest producer of model airplane engines in the world. This is a fairly early one. It's an 049. You can see it has a very tall, unusual looking cylinder on it. A relatively small prop because they're not real powerful back then. And fuel tank here, and a mixture here, and air comes in the back here. But this is some old literature. This is off a bigger engine here, the K&B Torpedo, and green head on most of them. That was a very popular engine. And bigger airplanes, and these early engines were for control line, where you have two little lines that go to your airplane and a handle to make it move up and down and do things. So, but when you're collecting old engines, it's a multifaceted hobby. There's the history behind them, and you can find vintage decals like that. And there again, the literature and interesting history, how model airplanes became such a huge hobby and are today, radio controlled of course. But anyway, yeah, like I say, it's a multifaceted hobby. There's lots of different things to do with them, so be right back. Well, the next company we're representing here is the L.M. Cox Company. And these are the engines that most people in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s are familiar with, because they were huge sellers and they were really high quality little engines, and they were the hot rods of the time era too, because like the OK Cubs and the K&B small engines, they weren't real hot rods, they were just kind of average performers. But when the Cox engines come out, and they were like night and day, and planes were so much faster with them and whatnot. And so anyway, this is a real early one here. I think that this one, if I remember right, is called the Thermal Hopper. And it's early 50s. It's an 049. This is a very common engine that was used mostly on planes. It's called the Golden Bee because of the gold color on it, and it's also an 049. And this is what they call, this is a TD series, the hot rod version, 049. Has a front venturi with like a carburetor and adjusting needle and stuff, and very light, little compact. These things turn up 20 grand easy. The thing about these little engines is that the noise they make is like a gigantic engine, man. They really have a high-pitched shriek you can hear for long ways. And this is one of their little bitty engines here. This is a .020, 020. It has a spring on here for hooking on the prop to spin it through, and then you get your mixture needle here, and you've got your fill and vent for your fuel tank. Inlets on the back through a tube into the crankcase. There again, a rotary valve. Anyway, they made one even smaller than this, a .010, which is really amazing. So anyway, be right back. Okay, well, here's another brand of engine. These are McCoy. It's a McCoy red head. They also had a blue head and whatnot, but these were another popular seller. They were, later ones like this were kind of the big engines, the poor man's big engines, because they were not the best engines in the world, but we used to fly them and do a lot with them. But it's funny, the little shop where we buy our motors, we'd go up and buy a new McCoy, take it home, either run perfect out of the box or wouldn't run at all, and we'd have to go back and get a different one. But usually one or two later we had good running ones. So there again, you know, there's lots of things that go with it. Here's a nice sheet on it. It shows all the parts and how to take care of it. Shows all the dimensions. Okay, well, the McCoy engines, like the redheads and stuff, like I say, had some quality control issues, but yeah, once you've got a good one, they'd run and run and run. And the early ones were made from 1942 to 56, and those were the best of them. And then the Testers Corporation bought them out. I think about 1956 or 57, late in the year or something. But here again, here's a poop sheet on one. Here's a Testers 049. And you know, compared to the Cox, they're kind of a medium performance motor. And there again, either got a good one or one that wasn't so good. But you know, they had all the poop sheets on them and stuff too. And here's some old original decals. This one has a venturi in the front, a mixture needle, but it also, in behind this plate, has a spring, so when you have a prop on it, you can wind it backwards and let go of it, and it'll start. So it's kind of a neat feature. And there again, front induction and exhaust come out little ports down here. So anyway, be right back. Well, next thing we're going to talk about is the applications for these little motors, all the different things you can do with them. So this one has a spinner on the front there for a propeller, so this is obviously for an airplane. And here's an airplane. We used to fly all kinds of different model airplanes, and most of them, you know, little stringers and all these little pieces of balsa, you had to glue them together, and it took a long time to put together. And then over the wings and the body, you'd put a tissue paper, and then you'd put a type of a, they call it dope, but it's actually a material like a paint that goes on them, and then it shrinks to make them tension on the wing top and stuff to make your airfoil. This one is the exact opposite. This is a silhouette plane. It's just flat wood. Okay, well, like I say, this is a silhouette plane, and it's just flat pieces of balsa. The wing has actually got a curvature, but was a flat piece of wood. It's just been sanded so that you actually have an airfoil to make it lift. And then on the front here, you have a plate. It has little ears on it here. And you take a plate exactly like that and bolt it to the back of the motor here. So it would go on just like this. And then it would be held on with rubber bands. And the reason we flew planes like this is that, it only took a half hour to build one. Be back flying, and the landing gear here's got rubber bands all. If it crashes, the motor falls off, the wheels come off. And the ones that we flew mostly were, even the wings and the tail section and stuff was all held on with rubber bands. So if you had a good crash and stuff, you just pick it up and maybe glue a little broken piece back on and be out flying again in no time. Okay, well, just talk about the innovative things that they did as a manufacturer. They made these little engines that would last for hours and hours and put out a tremendous amount of performance, but when you needed to service them, they made specialized tools for them. So this part here would go on the head here to take off the glow head, and then if you had a other style glow plug like this one, it fits right down over it, and you can unscrew it and take it right out. So anyway, just a neat little stuff to go with them. And anyway, we'll be back with another item that these little motors can be used for. Okay, well, not only did the companies make motors, they made model airplanes and boats and other things too. This is a UFO. It's made by Cox. It's got a 049 engine down in here, and fuel tank is built onto the engine there, little plastic tank, and then your prop is right here. It has a spring on here you can take and put on the prop, and then pull it backwards and let go, and it'll spin it up fast enough to start. But of course, a lot of these are pretty impractical. I mean, you'd have to be out in the middle of a giant farm the wind catches these things and they'll fly off. Because one of the things that I used to do, just because it was so cheap and easy, I bought a plastic flying model one time, a Pit Special. It was made by Cox. It lasted for 2 flights. I was going to do a wing over, and I came down and a big gust of wind hit it, and it missed the lawn by about 2 inches and hit the sidewalk where we used to fly at the school. And all I had left that was any good was the motor. It was an 020. So we used to take these Testors balsa gliders and put a piece of wood on the front to hold the motor, and they're again held on with a rubber band. And anyway, we'd make them so they were a free flight, and then I'd take the tail and put an angle on it so it would fly in circles. And when it would take off, it would fly so high you couldn't even see it. And so we'd always figure out which way the wind was blowing and go looking for it. And I got quite a few flights like that, but one time it disappeared. I couldn't find it. And that was in the fall, and then the next spring I was on my bicycle cruising down the neighborhood about a quarter mile away, and there was my plane sitting in a guy's gutter. Got it down, cleaned up the motor, and started flying it again. So anyway, lots of fun stuff. Some of it's impractical, but that's kind of the fun of having it. And these things warp a little bit, so this thing will probably crash, but we'll be right back. Well, here's another use of airplane engines originally, and of course this was a model car. It's what I call a tether car. So this was a very popular hobby for a long time. They used to have parks where they would run these cars, and there were a lot of companies making really hot rod engines. Some places they've reached 200 miles an hour. There's still a few tracks around, but mostly for vintage stuff like this. This is a McCoy car. It's got a McCoy 19 in it. It's a McCoy 35, but it's the same basic engine, only this a lot earlier. And so they would have a metal cable going over to a pivot point and they would go around in circles, and they were timed for speed. And this is all die-cast metal, and instead of having a prop on the front of it, has a gear drive mechanism on it, and the shaft that goes back to the rear wheels here. And there's where your fuel comes in here and fill your fuel tank. Anyway, these are pretty collectible. There were a bunch of companies made them, big prices on them. There's your mixture control right here. But anyway, like I say, collecting motors is a great hobby and multifaceted. I've got one more thing for you. Well, here's a lot more modern tether car. This is a Testers. And you remember Testers bought out McCoy, and then they started making their own little design engines. This is an 049. And it's like a Grand Prix car. It's got a couple of places right here for the, had a metal wire and came to a point here, and then the string or wire would go over to your pivot point. And the crankshaft has a gear on it, and here's the drive gear on the axle. And this piece here is kind of interesting. It's a little pulley that you could put on them, and the reason for that is it came with a little cord you could wrap around it and had a pull starter, or you can flip them wheels and stuff, but this would spin it a lot faster and make them start better, because the Testers engines like this were kind of so-so. They weren't near as good as the Cox's. Cox made tether cars too. So. But anyway, this thing is kind of neat because it's got all the BS with it still. So here's the parts list, kind of soaked with fuel. Tells you all the do's and don'ts. And it shows the pulley there for the starter. And of course, this is big advertising for it here. And then this was more specific info on it. Well, here's the next application of our little motors. The Hydroplane. This originally was a kit. The hull is made out of balsa wood, and it came with these plastic pieces for the nacelle and the seat. And you took a piece of aluminum and made the engine cover. And this has got an OK Cub engine in it. The thing that's interesting about this one is right here there's a little cord. It's a pull cord. It's a starter cord, so it has a recoil starter on it. It's a front rotary valve engine. And then the flywheel here for the extra weight has a little two-bladed prop underneath there. And it's unusual. This thing was never finished. What you would do, you'd put a rudder on the back and you'd have it so it would have tension on it. You could set it at an angle, and when you take it to the lake, you would go out in big circles, and when it run out of fuel, got to be a good swimmer or have a boat there. So anyway, that's how you'd retrieve them. Or if you hit a wake, they'd sink, so you used to fill them up with styrofoam. Anyway, yeah, just like I say, it's a little engines, or engines in altogether are such an encompassing hobby. It can be virtually anything and everything. So I'll be right back. Okay, well, there you have it. Why being a motorhead is such a good hobby. All the many facets you can do with them, play with all kinds of different things, but these little engines, when they sit, they get stuck. And the reason for that is that the fuel you use has castor bean oil in it, and when it sits for a long time it coagulates and freezes them up. Like this is getting a little bit sticky, it's starting to come loose. Been sitting for quite a while. But anyway, what I do to get the engines unstuck and keep them from doing that is that the first thing you want to use is my magic famous elixir here. It's Berryman's B12 Chem Tool. It's a carburetor cleaner and choke spray and stuff. This is the most powerful stuff on the market. Has been for years. It's also highly toxic, if you want to use it in an area where there's ventilation is excellent, and wear gloves with it. But anyway, if you have one of these engines that's froze up, it's usually right in the port here. And so you can spray this in there and then set it down and let it soak for a while, and it'll slowly dissolve that gum. Sometimes even the crank will be gummed up too, and you can pour some down into the venturi of the carburetor here. And once it's freed up and working good again, I put Marvel Mystery Oil in them, and that just goes in and sticks to the metal and keeps it lubricated and keeps it from oxidizing and stuff. I even wipe down the fins on the motor and stuff like that. A lot of them are made out of steel and they'll corrode if this black anodizing comes off. So anyway, just another facet of the hobby. Engines, even if you're just playing with little engines or big engines, there's all these different things. You're gonna learn how to work on them, find the in and outs of making them work properly. Keeps your mind sharp, keeps you occupied and having lots of fun. So remember, be a motorhead, collect vintage engines and stuff. It's a great hobby. Vintage is always best in this stuff. We'll see you on the next exciting video.